I never thought it'd be the kind of woman who would betray her husband with his own eccentric father, but here I am. Completely lost in the secret attraction that has consumed me, my body still trembling from the last time his hands were on me. When I first married my husband and moved into the old family house, I saw my father-in-law as nothing more than a harmless, quirky old man who spent his days tinkering with antique clocks and muttering to himself in the attic. He was just there, like the creaking floors or the dusty portraits on the walls. I smiled politely when he showed me his pocket watches, nodded at his strange little stories about time slipping away, and told myself he was sweet in that obsessment way older men sometimes are. Nothing more. My husband would laugh about it later in bed, calling him eccentric but harmless, and I would agree, curling into the safety of my new marriage like it was armor. Corridors tight like they were holding secrets of their own, and we both turned sideways at the same moment. His shoulder grazed mine, just for a heartbeat. But that faint scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco clung to my skin afterward, warm and unexpectedly intimate, like it had been waiting for me. I caught myself inhaling deeper than I should have, standing there frozen with the rain tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. My heart skipped, a sudden flutter I tried to blame on the storm outside. I whispered to the empty air, just an old man and his habits, just proximity in a house too small for all the years it had seen. Yet that scent followed me into the kitchen where I stood washing dishes, my hands trembling under the warm water. Why did it make my pulse quicken like that? He was my husband's father, the man who had raised him, who still called me dear in that gentle, distracted voice. I should have felt only respect, maybe a touch of fondness. Instead, something stirred low in my chest, a quiet ache I immediately tried to drown with thoughts of my husband's steady smile, his reliable hands that never carried the weight of forgotten stories. I told myself it was the rain making everything feel heavier, closer. That the house was playing tricks on me, pulling at threads I didn't know were loose. Later that same evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, I found him in the living room adjusting one of his clocks. The pendulum swung with a soft, rhythmic tick that seemed to match the unsteady beat inside me. He looked up, those knowing eyes crinkling at the corners, and offered me a cup of tea he'd made without asking. Our fingers didn't even touch when I took it, but the warmth from the porcelain felt like an echo of something I couldn't name. I sat across from him, the silence stretching between us like a held breath. He spoke softly about how time bends in old houses, how some moments refuse to pass cleanly. I nodded, pretending to listen, but really I was noticing the way his voice wrapped around the words, low and unhurried, like it had all the patience in the world. I hated how aware I suddenly was of him. The way his sleeves were rolled up just enough to show the faint lines of veins on his forearms, earned from years of delicate work with tiny gears and springs. The faint creak of his chair when he leaned forward. How the lamplight caught the silver in his hair and made it look almost distinguished. No, stop. This was wrong on every level. He was family. He was older. He was the last person on earth I should be noticing like this, with my breath catching in my throat and he rising under my skin for no reason at all. But the rain kept falling, and the hallway memory refused to fade. Every time I passed that narrow space afterward, I felt it again, that almost touch, that lingering trace of leather and tobacco pulling at me like gravity I couldn't fight. It paused for just a second longer than necessary, telling myself I was only checking if the floorboards were slippery from the damp. My mind warred with itself, one half screaming that this was innocent, harmless curiosity in a quiet house, the other half already whispering that nothing about the way my body remembered his nearness felt innocent at all. And then as I stood there lost in that thought, the attic door creaked open upstairs, and I heard his footsteps descending slowly, deliberately, like he knew exactly where I was waiting even though I hadn't moved. While my husband was away on business, the house felt heavier somehow, every creak of the old floorboards echoing like a question I didn't want to answer. My father-in-law moved quietly through the living room, placing an old vinyl record on the turntable with those careful hands of his. I stood in the doorway pretending to fold a blanket, but really I was listening to the way the music wrapped itself around the silence between us. He looked up and smiled, those knowing eyes catching mine for a moment longer than necessary. Something warm spread through my chest, dangerous and slow, like honey spilling over. I tried to drown it immediately, thinking of my husband's face, his voice on the phone earlier promising he'd be home soon. This was wrong. He was family, yet the melody kept pulling, and when he tilted his head slightly, inviting me closer without a word, Shvik betrayed me and carried me into the room. The music surrounded us, low and intimate, each saxophone note brushing against my skin like an unspoken confession. I sat on the edge of the couch, heart hammering, telling myself it was only polite to listen with him. His presence felt closer than the space between us allowed, that faint trace of leather and something older lingering in the air. I crossed my arms over my chest as if that could steady the unsteady rhythm inside me, but every breath I took seemed to carry the song deeper. He didn't speak at first, just let the jazz breathe between us. When he finally did, his voice was soft, almost a murmur. This one always reminds me how time slows when you least expect it. I nodded, not trusting my own words, because all I could focus on was the way his fingers rested on the arm of his chair, inches from where my hand lay on the cushion, not touching, never touching, but the almost was enough to make my pulse stutter. I hated how my body noticed him now, the subtle shift of his shoulders when he leaned back, the way lamplight played across the lines of his face. He chose under my collar, uninvited and impossible to ignore. "Stop this," I whispered inside my head. "He raised you a family with your husband. H.E.S. the man who taught him how to fix things, not the one who should make your breath catch like this." Yet the music kept playing and the warmth in my chest refused to fade, twisting into something sharper, more insistent. A few weeks later, he asked me to help with a delicate clock in his workshop, the one tucked behind the stairs where dust danced in slanted light. I hesitated at the doorway, but he was already spreading tiny brass gears across the wooden table, his movements precise and patient. "Just hold this steady for me, dear," he said, and when our fingers brushed over the cold metal, the roughness of his calloused skin sent a sudden jolt straight through me, electric and unforgiving. I pulled my hand back quickly, too quickly, murmuring, "This is wrong, HES family," under my breath like a prayer I hoped would stick. The words felt hollow even as I said them. That touch lingered all night, though, replaying in the dark while I lay beside my husband's empty side of the bed. I tossed and turned, remembering the unexpected texture of those hands, worn from years of tiny repairs, and how they had felt against mine for that single forbidden second. Guilt flooded me in waves, but so did the memory, refusing to let go. By morning I told myself it was nothing, just static from the old house, just two people sharing a quiet task. But the ache stayed low in my belly, a quiet hunger I tried to bury under thoughts of my loyal husband and the life we were building. Still, every time I passed the workshop door afterward, my steps slowed, drawn by the faint tick of mechanisms that now reminded me of something far less innocent. Slipping into ordinary moments like smoke under a door, I started noticing how he watched me while I cooked dinner, his gaze resting on the curve of my shoulder or the way I stirred the pot, not staring exactly, but seeing in that patient, knowing way of his. One night the warm wooden spoon in my hand felt strangely familiar, its smooth handle echoing the roughness it felt in the workshop, and before I could stop myself, my mind wandered to those hands on my body, tracing slow paths that made my cheeks burn. I hated myself for the thought, immediately forcing my mind back to my husband's steady presence, his reliable laugh, the way he always remembered how I liked my coffee. How could I let this happen? He was the man who sat at our table every Sunday, who fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. Yet here I was, standing at the stove with heat rising not just from the pan but from somewhere deeper, somewhere shameful. I gripped the spoon tighter, whispering to the empty kitchen that this was madness, that I needed to stop noticing, stop remembering, stop wanting. But the pull was there, gravity I couldn't fight, making every shared glance feel like a secret we weren't supposed to keep. And as I set the table that night, hearing his footsteps approach from the hallway, my breath caught again, wondering what he might say next, or if he could see the flush I tried so hard to hide. The storm hit without warning that evening, lights flickering once, twice, then plunging the whole house into sudden darkness. Rain lashed the windows like angry fingers, and thunder rolled low in the distance. I froze in the kitchen, heart already racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. His voice came soft from the living room, calm as ever. "Candles are in the drawer, dear. Come sit with me till it passes. I should have stayed upstairs. Instead, my feet carried me toward the glow. He had 2 candles lit on the old oak table, their flames dancing across the deep lines of his face, catching in the silver at his temples. He looked different in that unsteady light. Not just the man who fixed things around the house, but someone magnetic, almost alive with quiet storms of his own. I lowered myself into the chair across from him, knees brushing the edge of the table. His knee pressed against mine under the wood, accidental, warm through thin fabric. I didn't pull away right away. The contact sent heat blooming up my leg. Slow and undeniable. "Stop this now," my mind hissed, sharp and frantic. "He raised your husband, built this family with steady hands and late nights. A chess not for you to feel this way about." Yet my body betrayed me, leaning in just a fraction, letting the pressure linger 1 heartbeat longer than it should have. The candle flame dipped between us, casting shadows that made everything feel closer, heavier. I forgot how to breathe properly for a moment. His scent drifted over leather, faint tobacco, the comforting earthiness that always lingered in his workshop. It wrapped around me like invisible threads, pulling tighter with every roll of thunder. We talked about nothing, really. The storm, the old roof that might leak again, how my husband hated driving in weather like this. Ordinary words, but underneath them something else hummed electric and wrong. Later that same night, after the lights never came back and my husband had stormed out following one of our sharper fights, I slipped into the garden to let the rain hide my tears. The ground was soft and muddy under my bare feet, cool against heated skin. I thought I was alone until I heard his footsteps behind me, slow and careful. He didn't speak at first, just offered his handkerchief, that same one with the embroidered edge carrying the scent that now haunted my quiet moments. His fingers brushed my cheek as he wiped the tears away, gentle, almost reverent. Before I could protest, he drew me into a hug, arms strong from years of tinkering and lifting, steady as the heartbeat I suddenly felt thumping against my own chest. Strong, unshakable, Sailton't have quickened in response, but it did, a traitorous flutter that made shame burn hot behind my eyes even as longing coiled low and deep. I need to stop, I thought, even while pressing closer for 1 stolen second, letting the warmth of him chase away the chill of the rain and the argument. "This is your father-in-law, the man who taught your husband patience, who sits at family dinners with that quiet smile." Yet here I was, trembling in his embrace, the forbidden gravity between us growing heavier, impossible to deny. His hand rested at the small of my back, not moving, just there, and every nerve ending screamed with awareness of how close, how dangerously close we stood. From that night forward the air between us changed, thickened like the humidity after the storm. Stolen glances in the hallway stretched longer than they ever had, eyes meeting then darting away, leaving behind a trail of unspoken questions. I found excuses to linger near the attic stairs, drawn by the faint creak of floorboards and the scent of old books mixed with his presence, worn and unmistakable. One afternoon I climbed up there under the pretense of looking for old photo albums. He was already there, surrounded by dusty shelves and half-repaired mechanisms, the lights slanting through the small window catching motes in the air like tiny secrets. "Cal didn't sleep last night," he admitted quietly, voice low enough that it felt meant only for me. We talked for what felt like hours about nothing and everything. The way time slips away when you're not watching, the small regrets that linger like shadows. Each word pulled me deeper, even as I repeated silently, "Just one more conversation, nothing more." Nothing that crosses the line. But when I left the attic that day my legs felt unsteady, skin flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the stuffy room. Desire pooled low and insistent, a trembling ache I tried desperately to ignore while guilt clawed at my throat. How could something so innocent leave me feeling this undone? He was off limits, yet every shared moment now carried the weight of what almost happened, what I almost allowed myself to want. I whispered to the empty hallway that this had to end soon, that I was playing with fire I couldn't control. Still, the next time our paths crossed near the attic door, my steps slowed again, pulse quickening at the mere possibility of another stolen talk. And the terrifying realization that part of me hoped he would be waiting. The moment of no return arrived during another business trip of my husband's. The house had settled into that peculiar quiet only empty rooms know, and I found myself climbing the attic stairs again, telling myself it was only to check on the old clocks I'd been restoring. Dust danced in the slanted light from the small window, and that haunting jazz record played softly from the corner gramophone, saxophone notes curling through the air like smoke. He was already there, bent over a half-disassembled mechanism, sleeves rolled up, forearms corded with quiet strength. When he looked up, his eyes held mine a beat too long, and something inside me simply gave way. We didn't speak at first, just stood there, the space between us shrinking without either of us moving. Then his hand reached out, slow, deliberate, sliding under the hem of my dress until the rough texture of his palm rested against my thigh. Warmth bloomed there, spreading like summer heat through thin fabric, and every rational thought fractured. I whispered, voice trembling, even as my body betrayed me, legs parting just enough to invite what I knew I shouldn't. The words felt hollow, a last desperate shield against the gravity pulling us together. His breath brushed my neck, warm and unsteady, carrying the faint scent of oil and aged wooden, something unmistakably him. I forgot how to breathe properly. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it over the music. Thumb tracing a small circle that sent electricity racing across my skin, not quite touching where the ache had grown unbearable, yet close enough that surrender felt inevitable. I need to stop this, I thought, even while leaning into him, fingers curling into his shirt as if he were the only solid thing left in the world. He was my husband's father, the eccentric man who fixed broken things and collected timepieces like they held answers to life's regrets. This was wrong on every level. Yet the wrongness only made the pull stronger, like a storm you know will drown you but still step into. Then the almost moment shattered. His hand moved higher and scrumbled completely. We sank onto the old leather couch, its surface cool and cracked beneath us, the jazz melody wrapping around our ragged breathing like a secret witness. His touch overwhelmed every sense. The weight of him, the way his presence filled the small space until nothing else existed. In that suspended heartbeat I felt more alive than I had in years, every nerve alight with a hunger I'd never known, body yielding to the man who was never supposed to awaken this in me. Time blurred, the intensity built until everything narrowed to the shared rhythm of our breaths, the faint creak of leather, the distant tick of clocks counting down to consequence. When it crested, a wave of devastating pleasure crashed through me, leaving me trembling in his arms, skin flushed and damp, the scent of him clinging to every inch of me like a brand. We lay there afterward, catching our breath in the dim attic light, his fingers still tangled gently in my hair. The jazz record had begun to skip softly, repeating a single tender note over and over. For one fragile moment it felt like the world had paused just for us, until the front door clicked open downstairs. My husband's voice called out, tired but familiar, home early. Flight got cancelled. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. My father-in-law's seed still warm inside me, the evidence of our surrender undeniable, and that faint jazz melody still playing like nothing had changed. My heart seized. Footsteps echoed on the stairs below, growing closer, while upstairs we froze, bodies still pressed together in the aftermath. I realized then the true price of this secret. The life I knew was over, cracked open like one of his delicate timepieces. Guilt and shame flooded in, yet beneath them burned that same treacherous longing, refusing to die. Was the devastating pleasure worth destroying everything? Or would I do it all again the very next time he looked at me with those eyes? Eyes that saw too much and asked for nothing yet demanded surrender? He squeezed my hand once, a silent promise or warning, before we pulled apart. I smoothed my dress with shaking fingers, wondering how I would face my husband with this ache still humming through my veins. Downstairs the door to normal life waited. Up here, the unresolved pull lingered like the last note of that jazz record, haunting, unfinished. Was I wrong for wanting him this night?